The life of a playwright is tough. It's not easy, as some people may seem to think. You work hard writing plays that nobody puts on. You take up other lines of work to try to make a living. Became an actor. People don't hire you, so you just spend your days doing the errands of your trade. Today, I had to be up at 10 in the morning to make important phone calls. Then I'd go to the stationery store to buy envelopes, then to the Xerox shop. There were dozens of things to do. By 5, I finally made it to the post office and mailed off several copies of my plays. Meanwhile, checking constantly with my answering service to see if my agent had called with any acting work. In the morning, the mailbox had just been stuffed with bills. What was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to pay them? After all, I was already doing my best. I lived in the city all my life. I grew up on the Upper East Side. When I was 10 years old, I was rich. I was an aristocrat, riding around taxis surrounded by comfort, and all I thought about was art and music. Now, I'm 36, and all I think about is money. It was 7. I would have liked nothing better to go home and have my girlfriend Debbie cook me a nice, delicious dinner. But for the last several years of our financial circumstances has forced Debbie to work 3 nights a week as a waitress. After all, somebody had to bring in a little money. So, I was on my own. But the worst thing of all was I had been trapped by odd series of circumstances into agreeing to have dinner with a man I've been avoiding literally for years. His name was Andre Gregory. At one time, he had been a very close friend of mine, as well as my most valued colleague in the theater. In fact, he was the man who had first discovered me and put one of my plays on the professional stage. When I had known Andre, he had been at the height of his career as a theater director. The amazing work he did with his company, the Manhattan Project, had just stunned audiences throughout the world. And then something had happened to Andre. He dropped out of the theater. He sort of disappeared. For months at a time, his family seemed only to know that he was traveling in some odd place like Tibet, which is really weird because he loved his wife and children. He never used to like to leave home at all. Or else he'd hear that somebody had met him at a party and he'd been telling people that he talked to trees or something like that. Obviously, something terrible had happened to Andre. The whole idea of meeting him made me very nervous. I really wasn't up for that sort of thing. I had problems of my own. I couldn't help Andre. Was I supposed to be a doctor or what? I'd call Andre and he suggested that we meet in this particular restaurant. I've been rather surprised because Andre's taste used to be very aesthetic, even though people always known that he had some money somewhere. How else could he have been flying off to Asia and so on, and still have been supporting his family? The reason I was meeting Andre was that an acquaintance of mine, George Grassfield, had called me and just insisted I had to see him. Apparently, George had been walking his dog and in an odd section of town that night before, and he suddenly come upon Andre leaning against a crumpled old building and sobbing. Andre explained to George that he had just been watching the Ingmar Bergman movie Autumn Sonata about 25 blocks away, and he had been seized by a fit of ungovernable crying when the character played by Ingrid Bergman had said, "I always live in my art, but never in my life." I remember when I first started working with Andre's company, I couldn't get over the way that actors would hug when they greeted each other. Wow! Now I'm in the theater, I thought. I was feeling incredibly nervous at meeting him. I wasn't sure I could stick through an entire meal with him. I was beginning to realize that the only way to make this evening bearable would be to ask Andre a few questions. Asking questions always relaxes me. In fact, I sometimes think that my secret profession is that I'm a private investigator, a detective. I always enjoyed finding out about people, even if they're in absolute agony. I always find it very interesting. So I arrived and we talked for a while about my writing and my acting and about my girlfriend Debbie. We talked about his wife Chiquita and his 2 children, Nicholas, Marina. Finally, I got around to asking what he had been up to in the last few years. Oh God, I'm just dying to hear this. At first, he seemed a little reluctant to go into it. Then he extolled it, and I was rapt. If you wanted to know the whole story, you should ask me a few questions. I have to get home to Debbie now, so let's talk when you have more time to listen.